Hello everyone, and welcome on behalf of Realtrac to today's webinar, Managing Purchase Orders in Realtrac. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded, and we will forward that link to you when we have the recording downloaded and ready to go. Being busy as you all are, we understand a majority of you may be multitasking at times during today's presentation. To accommodate a smooth and enjoyable webinar for all, your microphones will be muted, and we'd like to do an audio test right now. If you could just confirm with me through a little chat message that you're hearing us okay, that would be helpful. Just type in your chat box on the lower right of your control panel, confirm that you can hear us okay. Hearing fine. Okay. Thank you, Doretta, and thank you, Julie. Okay, great. So during the presentation, if you would like to ask questions, please use that chat pod located at the bottom right of the screen in the toolbar and choose the To All chat button if that's available to you so everyone can see your questions. My name's Tom Buck, and I'm the General Manager of Realtrac, and I am pleased to be your moderator for today. We will try to get to your questions as quickly as possible based on where we are at the time when the question comes in. We will have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation as well. Now, if we run into some time constraints, we may not be able to get to all the questions. We will certainly do our best. If you'd like to view the webinar in full screen, you may click on the Expand Screen button in the top right-hand corner of the presenter's screen. I'd like to introduce our presenter today. Standing in for Don Cawley is Matt First, who's a key member of our development team creating the newest version of Realtrac. He's got over 14 years of experience creating large software systems for deployment in medium-sized businesses, just the same situation we have at Realtrac. He's got a knack for programming and for customer service. It's quite possible many of you have talked with Matt over the last few months. He's got a great set of communication skills. I'm thrilled he's going to cover the webinar today on purchase orders. And with that, I'd like to introduce Matt. And Matt, it's your show.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody. I know I've spoken to quite a few of you, and I'm sure eventually I'll speak to all of you at some point in time. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to fill in for Don today, who unfortunately couldn't join us, so I'll do my best to try to fill Don's shoes. So today we're going to talk about purchasing in Realtrac. And just to give an overview of kind of where we're heading, we'll look at the next slide here on our screen. So this is kind of the big 6 topics that I'm going to touch upon. We'll talk about item masters, what they are, and kind of what they're important and what role they play. We'll touch real briefly on just adding a vendor and taking a look at our vendor database. No big deal there. Then we'll talk about the purchase order list screen and some of the cool new search features that we've got on there, especially for our customers coming in from 9. You know, there's a lot of power on that screen. It's a lot easier to get to some of this stuff, so we'll highlight some of that real quick. And then the meat of the discussion is going to be about purchase orders themselves, adding items to purchase orders, partial receivement of shipments, receiving them all. You know, we add the ability now to add certifications and files to the items that we purchase, and we can trace that through the job's life cycle and all that sort of fun stuff. So that'll be the bulk of what we talk about. I just wanted to touch real quickly on the material usage tab in the jobs, because I think that's a new feature in 10, and I think it's really cool. And then we'll just talk about how the inventory works in 10 and what happens when we receive items for a job or versus for inventory and all that sort of good stuff. So that's kind of our overview. I think after each of these big topics, we'll pause for questions. So very quickly here, we'll get the ball rolling and take a look at our item masters. So let's fire up our Realtrac 10 client and get the fun going. So I'm going to log in as myself. Always a good idea to try to create accounts for all of your users. We do have that audit trail that we're building in the background. So if you want to know who's received items, who made the initial purchase order, I mean, if you create accounts for all of your users, we're going to get a lot of that information, kind of real rich feature set. So we're going to start talking first about the item master. And the item master is a way to define the goods that we're going to purchase. We can give them a name, but we also have a lot of other cool information that we can kind of add about them. So before, we're going to end up here ordering a piece of super titanium, or we'll make up some sort of item that we want to purchase for a job or maybe for our inventory. So if I want to define my super titanium before I can order it, I need to go in and create an item master for it. So within our inventory group, which can be, which is a permission that we can give to specific users. So not to go off on too much of a tangent, but you have the ability, if you want just one person in your organization to be able to define the items that can be purchased, you give that person permission to the inventory module, but then the other people actually doing the ordering don't necessarily need permission to that inventory module. They can just order the items from the PO. So we got kind of the idea of segmenting off our permissions, as you grow and maybe want to start putting controls in place like that. So I'm going to add my super titanium. So within the inventory module, I'm going to pop over to my item master entry. This is going to be, we've got a couple different classes here, as you can tell. So the idea here is that this has helped us segment out the items so we have another way to classify them and make it easier to find and search and run reports on them. So I'm going to call my super titanium some raw steel. I'm going to use an existing item master class. But if I wanted to further define these and be able to run reports on them, I can add additional item classes to this and get better segmentation on the stuff that I'm buying or the stuff that I'm producing. So in order to add some items here, I'm going to and click the add button, obviously. So I select my raw steel from the screen, and now I can create the item name itself. So I'm going to call this something silly, super duper titanium. And I can add a little description. Whatever description I add here is actually going to automatically appear on the PO when I first create it and add this item to the purchase order. I can choose to either get rid of that description altogether, or I can append other information to it. So if this is a 3-inch round piece of titanium that comes in 12-foot increments, we'll say. So again, when I add this to a purchase order now, I'm going to have the item name of super duper titanium, and the description is going to pop in there automatically as well. And I can edit that or add to it or what have you. So that'll be something that my vendor is going to see when I add it to my purchase order. As soon as I click that button and add it to my item master, I can add some additional information, some kind of meta information about super duper titanium. I can add comments, which are things only for internal use. So if I want to mention that when we receive it, wear gloves because it's toxic or something like that. That's kind of just an internal memo that our vendor isn't going to see, but it's something that we want to note for ourselves. The build type's kind of important since it kind of determines what we do automatically when we receive it. If we, for example, if we say that this is a piece of material like a hard physical good, we know that when we order it, we can probably do one of two things with it. We can either stuff it into inventory, or we can consume it in a job right away, where we push it to that job and say, this job is going to consume this stuff immediately. Whereas something that we label as a subcontract, we know we're not necessarily going to add that to inventory. Really, as soon as we receive some subcontract, say a heat treat service, we're going to apply that cost to the bill right away, and it'll also appear in that material usage tab, but we won't necessarily need to make an inventory item to note it that we've received it. So I'm going to classify this as a material. And then we've got a whole bunch of other cool stuff in here. One thing to note is our reorder point, our reorder quantity. So for these values, I can say when we get below 10 units in stock, I want to place an order, and I want to order 50 units at a time. So we have another report on our inventory screen where we can click on it and say, just show me everything that's kind of at my reorder point or below. And it's a real quick and easy way for your purchasing manager, if you want to do a bulk level of purchases, to get an idea of all the material they need to order to get our inventory levels back up to where we want them. And we got our little recommendation, if you will, or hint that we want them to order about 50 units at a time. As we continue to order it, some of this other information is going to update, for example, the last ordered, which will give you an idea of your speed in which you're ordering it. I'll just take 1 second to note, we've got this associated material scratch pad for our counts per cubic inch. What that means is if you fill out that value, if you have our estimating module, you can use this material in the material scratch pad. So if we add a value here at this point, as soon as we input that value, that tells the material scratch pad that we want to be able to do calculations on this. So if you have no interest in this, or if it's a subcontract that you're not necessarily going to want to do, you can go ahead and ignore this value. But if you want to use our estimating module to try to get an idea of some costs and how many units of your material you're going to need to produce your final products, I'd recommend using that value, and that'll tell the system that we want to make that available. So one additional step I'll take before we try to order this item is adding some default vendors here. Now, we don't necessarily have to do this in 10 if you can order items that aren't from a default vendor, but we do highlight them special in our search screen to say these are the vendors that you have approved and are good. So it's a matter of if you wanted to instill a policy where you're only allowed to buy specific items from specific vendors, you definitely want to add this step where you're going to pick out which vendors are approved for purchasing our super duper titanium here. So I'm going to click on my list and add maybe a couple vendors that I like to purchase this material from. So we're going to add them as an option. If my vendor has a specific part number for super duper titanium, super DT 001, I can add that information. And I can predict what I'm expecting to pay per piece for them, which will kind of pre-fill out my PO as I go. And they give us 3 weeks. Let me add one more vendor just so we have some options to choose from. Our friendly friends at Japan Technology. But they're charging me $11.56, those rascals. All right, so I've added my my material, my super duper titanium. I've got a little description. We talked about the material scratch pad and some of the reorder points. Any discussion or any questions on what we want to do with the item master, why we use it, any of the items on the screen or the selections?
Matt, so far I don't see any questions coming in. Feel free to send us a couple questions using the chat function in the control panel, and we'll carry on, and if a question comes in.
Great. All right, we'll just quickly touch upon, I'll add another vendor here really quick. The only reason I'm doing this is just because we need to have our vendors identified and created in the system before we can cut a PO for them. So I'll just pop over there really quick. Within the toolbox, we go into the system setup. And again, this is another interface that can be walled off, if you will. We can assign permissions so that only specific users in your environment have the ability to add vendors or edit the vendors. So depending on your permissions level, you may or may not see this tab on the screen. But I just want to touch upon it really quick. You know, we can add a vendor really quick if we want. A vendor called suppliers. Livonia. That would be a practical way of shipping some titanium. So we'll add that. Now the only thing I mentioned previously is that we're going to have to add some billing and shipping, but at that point we'll be able to add this as a supplier. And I'm not going to make them one of my default vendors, but we'll see what happens when we choose them. So, bear with me for a second. Hopefully I don't do any terrible typing. And we'll duplicate that and make a shipping address as well. Cool. So any questions on that really quick? I know I just buzzed over that super duper quick, but I've said super duper too many times, obviously. All right. So let's take a look at our PO history screen. Some of our 9 users will note that things are a little different here. We got our built-in search technologies that let us really quickly organize and find a whole bunch of cool stuff. So any of these fields up here that are light yellow color, maze if you will, we can search upon. So as soon as I start typing in that field, we immediately get results that are kind of changing dynamically as we type. So T dash gets us that, but as I enter the 1, we get other cool stuff. And I can combine all the fields. So if I want to know part T138 with the B, C, D, E, we get some other cool stuff. So we can use any of these fields and kind of combine our searches. And in addition, we've got all these cool checkboxes up top that let us kind of filter bigger things. So for example, if we wanted to know a list of ones that haven't been issued and haven't been received yet, we can combine these checkboxes and our search all together at the same time. So let me all open ones for inventory items, that are for drawing 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got some cool stuff that we can kind of all bring together with our various checkboxes along top and search technologies. So you'll note some of these items, when I click on one row, we get the double row, and that's because we have 2 different items on this individual purchase order. So if I double click on this one, for example, we'll see that we have 2 separate items. So the history screen is actually showing us every item, and one purchase order may have more than one item. Pretty straightforward and obvious, but it's maybe not something that's obvious at first glance. We've also got a set of print codes here that kind of give you an idea of what's happened. If an invoice has been voided, if it's been exported into our accounting system, if the purchase order has been printed, all that sort of good stuff. And those correspond up here with some of these checkboxes where we know if something's been printed or not issued, for example, and all that sort of goodness. So, and you can always hover over the print code to actually get the full details about what the codes mean, because I always forget them all the time. The difference between X and E and all that sort of goodness. So let's issue a purchase order for some of our super duper titanium and maybe some other items and good stuff. So to kick off the purchasing process, I'm going to go over to my PO tab. And we've got a PO tab within the job group as well. If you're purchasing items for a job and some other jobs or for inventory, you can always get to the purchase order tab through the job group. But we'll start out easy and just go PO history, click over to the POs, and I'm going to issue a new purchase order. So as soon as I do that, you'll see some of my information pre-populates of who my company is, which I can always switch if for some reason I'm going to have this delivered somewhere else for additional processing before it arrives on my doorstep. But typically it's going to be delivered right to you. And you'll see all of our codes, status codes up here are kind of blank starting out. We haven't printed this, we haven't exported it to our accounting package yet, and marking it verbal would be the same as making it having been printed. The system kind of figures that you have handled and done the process officially, and officially given that to your vendor. So let's add our super duper titanium company, maybe. Super titanium suppliers. Again, I'm going to use our search technologies. Let me cancel out of here. I'm going to click on our company name, or we can click in the customer vendor code if we so choose. So if you prefer to work from the codes that you give your vendors, you can click in this box. If you prefer to use the full name, you can click in the box on the left. The one that's a little bit longer. So after I click in there, I'll start typing freely on my keyboard. And you'll note again, as I start typing, we get less and less responses in our grid here. So I'm good enough that I know this is the one I want, and I can hit enter. If I wish to change it, I made a mistake. Again, I can click in either one of these and just start typing again normally, K-A, what have you. But that's the one that I want. If I had multiple contacts, I could select a different one from my drop-downs, but I really only got the one cup's billing address, so that's all I'm going to see at this point in time. We've added the ability here in the last 2 or 3 releases. If you wish to override this and kind of have some generic information, you can click on that and just kind of type in some generic stuff. I know some of our customers like to do that. Instead of using the actual vendor's address, they would put special instructions in there. What have you. Not the best practice in the world, but if that's what works best for your company, then so be it. But I'd recommend, issuing a purchase order in a traditional manner where we've got our vendor and our customer that's going to be receiving it. So we've got a whole bunch of good stuff going on the screen. We've kind of got this header section up here that prints some generic information about the whole purchase order, and then we can add individual items to the purchase order. So I'm going to start out just giving our vendor some information about when I'm expecting to get my material. So for the whole order, I want it by the end of the month, we'll say. So I click on our expiration date, and now I can double click on the 30th and select. At that point, we populate that up, and you can see we pulled in some of the information that I created with the super titanium suppliers. I said our default terms are 30 days for this vendor. Their FOB is Livonia, and we'd like to ship via UPS. So I can always override these on a per purchase order basis, but it will pull in and kind of kickstart our purchase order based upon what we've got set up in our vendor. So I can begin adding the items. So as I want to add our first item, I'm going to click our little green button here in the item rows, and we can start typing in our item name. So I'm going to type in titanium. Again, I clicked in that item name, and I started typing on my keyboard, which brought up another window, and I can search either based on the name or description, because all these fields are yellow, so I can choose whatever works best for me. For example, if I just wanted to look at all of our RST item classifications, I can, or if I was interested maybe in raw aluminum as opposed, I know that's RAW, and apparently we don't have any of those in our item master, but we do have some RADs, if you will. But if I click over into our item name, start typing my titanium, here's the item that I've added. Now you'll note this color here is gray, and that tells me as a user that they are not one of my preferred vendors for purchasing super duper titanium. You'll see down here in the bottom of the screen we've got a little hint that's a visual clue that if it's darkened in green, that means it's a default supplier or one that we've approved. We allow you to override that and just add it anyways, but let's try to switch our supplier maybe to that Alro. I am absolutely sure. Now, when I go to add our item, we see that nice green color, which tells me they're on my approved vendors list. I'm also going to get some cool information. So for example, as soon as I select this, it's going to pre-populate my costs and the other things that I filled in to the item master for this vendor. So when I added the Alro steel, I told the system that I typically am paying $9.89 for each unit. So since we knew that and we added them as a vendor, we kind of get that information for free. We can always override this, and the system will ask us if we want to update our item master at the same time. Very cool. But by using these preferred vendors, we get kind of some extra information for free. So the two columns that are kind of important that we need to make a decision on right now is this material column, which is kind of like our bill column in terms of how do we want to treat this material or goods, and then this destination. They work kind of hand in hand together. So first, let me click on our material column, and we see we've got three different options. Is this material, subcontracting, or other? Which is, you'll note, is kind of how we categorize our different bill charges at the same time. So you can kind of consider this to lead to our charges and our breakdowns of the costs for this job. So if we make it as material, which is pre-populated because, again, as we built our item master, we said that this is material, so it's going to pre-populate that, but we can always switch it if we want. But when we receive this item, it's automatically going to apply the charges to our bill, and we will see those charges appear for the job. But at the same time, we have to decide what we're going to do with it. We know it's a material, but what are we going to do with it? Is this destined for a job, or is this going into our inventory, or is it a non-inventory item? So as I click on the destination with my mouse, we have the choice of reserving it for a job, reserving it for inventory, or it's a non-inventory item. Well, I know this is going to my job, 1027, so I clicked on my job window, and I'm going to start typing my job number, 1027. And I'm building some door keys, so I'm going to click on that. As soon as I do that, we'll note that the destination has automatically switched to a job, and we know it's heading to job 14J1027. And I'm going to need 2 units of that to run my job. But I'm going to order some additional super duper titanium for inventory. So I'm going to add another line, click on my item name, start typing my titanium, and I can use my mouse or the keyboard to click on it and select. Now instead of non-inventory where it's currently going, I want to keep track of this in my inventory. So I'm going to switch it over. I'm going to leave my bill type here to material because that's obviously what it is. And I'm going to order 10 units. I'm going to order 50 units because that's what we wanted in the item master. And I'm going to add a little comment. Again, you'll see there at the description I added in the item master kind of comes along for free, but I'm going to make a note to myself. Not in a hurry to receive this. And that's going to appear on our report when we go to print it. So at this point, I'm expecting 52 units of our Super Duper Titanium on the 30th. We can override the individual dates if we so choose. If we're not necessarily in such a hurry for this, I can make it due maybe by the end of July as opposed to when I really need to kick off my job and get this one going. So before we go any further, how do we feel about the interface and the differences between approved vendors and other vendors and adding items to our purchase order? Any questions, any comments, anything you want to see that I glossed over? All right, awesome. So at this point, traditionally in a workflow, I'm going to issue a purchase order. So in the Realtrac system, the issuing process is really triggered by when we print it and...
We do have it.
Oh, great.
So the question that we received, Matt, is what setting in the toolbox setup do I need to turn on to give other access to add a vendor? So I presume that this is if I want someone else to be able to set up vendors, how do I do that?
All right, let's go into Toolbox and take a look. So within Toolbox, we're going to go into our System Setup. And then we're going to head to the Employee tab, which is a slight misnomer, if you will, because it contains both employees, as in your shop floor people and the people sitting in your office, as well as your Realtrac users. So for example, let's click on Don McHugh here and see what his status is. So when I click on Don, we see that Don has got the shop floor role. So that means that Don is able to go into the touch screens on our floor over here next door, and he can click on his name and he can log into a job and start working on a mill or whatever we have on the floor. But in addition, Don also works in the office. So we've given him office, sales, and the admin roles. So when we click on all those, we see the individual permissions over here in the bottom right. So Don can do everything in the system right now, but we can limit it so that Don has less access. So if I wanted to make it so that Don could not, right now Don would be able to add vendors, which I'm answering it backwards unfortunately, but since this system right here is selected, Don is able to see all these individual tabs in the system. But if we remove it, at this point Don would not be able to manipulate employees or add customers or vendors, manipulate our work center, etc. The only tab he would have would be the client settings so that he can just set up and connect to Realtrac. So the proper answer is if you want to enable an employee to be able to add customers and vendors, we can give maybe David here the sales role and then add them to the system, and at that point they'd be able to add their own customers and vendors.
Okay, Matt, I don't see any other questions at this time, but feel free as we're going to type in a question in the chat box or the question box.
All right, so we are going to print a report or preview it, and that's going to mark our purchase order as having been issued, which is cool. Then we can go and kind of sort our purchase orders and show some that have been issued and some that have not. So from our reports tab, I'm going to just simply preview our purchase order and see how it looks. All right, yes, that's what I want. Maybe at this point I print it off or fax it or send an email off to my vendor to let them know that I'm interested in my 52 units of our Super Duper Titanium. So after I close this preview, which you would see this pop up as well if you exported it to a PDF or exported it to an email or printed it off on a printer, as soon as you do that action, Realtrac prompts you to ask if it was successfully printed. So this is an important question. As soon as we say yes, our status is going to switch from not printed to printed, which means this is issued and we expect that it's gone in the wild at this point, that our vendor is going to receive this and start giving us the goods. So if I'm not ready or if I made a mistake and I noticed it when I did a preview, I would say no, and we would keep it as not having been printed. So when I say yes, we see that the screen switches over, and now we know that this purchase order has been printed. Hopefully that's straightforward and good to go. And if I didn't want to print it, if I just called up the vendor or what have you on the phone, I could check the verbal box, which would effectively be the same thing. At that point, we would consider the purchase order to have been issued, and it's a binding document, if you will. So kind of the next step at this point is we start to receive our goods. So I'm going to pretend that my 2 units for my job are about to arrive, and I'm going to receive those. Before I do that, though, I am going to step over to my job here, 1027, and just see what's going on with that job. So my 2 units are for job 14J1027, so let's take a look at that job really quick. So if I go into my job screen and search for 14J1027, so we see a few things going on here. If I go into the purchase order tab within the job, I should have a history now of that purchase order that I just issued in the other screen. Additionally, I just want to drop over to this material usage tab really quick. You can see we've already added an entry on this job for the Super Duper Titanium. We know that we have 2 units outstanding that haven't arrived yet. So the reason that I show this screen is if you've got a production manager on your floor or somebody that's driving the floor, they don't necessarily need to go in and look at purchase orders to try to figure out the status of the job. Really, if you want to give your floor person just access to the jobs within our permission system, within the material usage tab, they can kind of get a really good idea of where we stand on all the goods that we need to start the job. So, for example, I know for packing peanuts, we've actually received those units. They're on hand and waiting for us. But our Super Duper Titanium, we can look at the screen and say, oh, I know the front office has cut a PO for it, but we haven't received those yet. We can come back in and check on this in a minute when we receive it, and then we're going to, the status of this job is going to change. So really, it's possible to run your floor just from kind of this job screen and get an idea when the material's in and when I'm good to go and when I can start my production. So let's say we got our 2 units of Super Duper Titanium. I'm going to click on our item line, and I'm going to tell the system I've received that item. So it's going to ask me a couple questions. How many units did I receive? If I have a specific lot number or heat treat number, where I'm storing it, if I'm going to move this to inventory. And we have the ability to add some certifications as well. So I've received both units. I'm going to give it my lot number, I made up. And it's going to sit on a shelf for me for a little bit before I actually get started. So I'm going to give it a location. Let's see if I got a document just to add to their attach here to our certification so we can check it out and see how that works. For lack of a better option, I'm just going to throw one of these blueprints on here. But we'll pretend that this is a certification that says our super titanium has been heat treated. And hopefully you can treat titanium, and that's not a silly thing to say, and I apologize if it is. I'm not a manufacturing person, obviously. So when I drag and drop that file onto our little receive folder here, we get our pop-up that says, is this just a general document, maybe that describes the material, or is it a specific certification? And this is just an easy way for you to classify the documents, and we kind of group them together in that manner. So this is my certification for my 2 pieces of titanium that I'm going to add there. And when we go back to our material usage screen, hopefully we'll see it and it'll look cool. So we've got a very important question now, which is, are we going to process this material right away, or is this job about to consume it, or do I want it to sit on my shelf and I'm going to move it in at a later date because I'm not quite ready to start my job yet? So that's kind of what these 2 buttons mean down here. Since this is a material, if I simply click the receive button, we're going to move these 2 units to inventory, and we're going to allocate it for the job, which means it's still sitting on our shelf. The job hasn't consumed it yet, but we're planning on the job consuming it shortly. The reason you may want to do that is as soon as we move it to the job and it gets consumed, those costs appear on the bill right away, and the costing for our job changes immediately. On the other hand, if we're doing a long-run job, or maybe we're doing a smaller quantity to begin before we do our full production, maybe I want to move just a smaller number of the units and not my full inventory quite yet. So we have kind of a decision to make is, do I want to allocate it but not consume it, or do I want to consume it right away? So receive and move to job means we're going to consume all that, and the costs are going to go to our bill right away. If we click the receive button, we're going to allocate it to inventory, and it's going to sit there. That's an important, I know we're doing things a little differently than 9 as well for our customers that came from 9. So are there any questions on that and kind of the pros and cons of one approach versus the other? How are we feeling for time? Is this pace okay?
Probably about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
On that. Is that?
That sounds good.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so again, if you have any questions, put them in the question area or in the chat box. We're doing our best to pay attention there.
So for this example, I'm just going to receive it, and we'll kind of take some extra steps and look at our inventory and see what happens and then do that final move operation. So when I receive it, let's take a look at our inventory and see the status of that. So I'm clicking on my inventory module. And now I'm going to just look for our super duper titanium. So I get 2 rows in our results when I look at our super duper titanium. The top row tells us that we've received 2 units and it's allocated to a job. Which job? Okay, it's over here on the right. Job 14J 1027. I also still have my 50 units outstanding that are on order but haven't been allocated. So they're going to go right into inventory as soon as I receive them. So similarly, if I pop back into our job 1027, we'll note on the material usage tab that we've kind of changed those columns a little bit. So our floor guy, if you will, or gal, will know that the units have arrived but are sitting in inventory. So if we pop over to our material usage tab, again, here's our raw steel. And now we have the 2 units on hand, and it's been allocated to our job. So we're almost ready to consume that and have the costs hit the job. So again, you can kind of just run your business right off of the material usage tab if you so choose. If you prefer to work off of the POs, that works fine as well. So I'm going to now move this to our job, and which is going to have those costs hit the bill, and all this good stuff is going to happen. So as soon as I hit the Move to Job button, it's going to ask me what cost I want to be rectified on the bill. I paid $9.89. And I'm going to move both units right away. We'll move from inventory because we're going to have track of it now on our job page. And those costs have been added to the bill, and our costing for our job has changed now to note that we've got $19.78 more cents worth of material. And pure inefficiency is the only reason I'm not leaving this window open, because it is not the most optimal way. So we'll see I got $44 of total bill charges. I suspect I've moved some other things into, there we go. So we've got our super duper titanium, 2 units at $9.89 for a total of 19 bucks. So all that flow worked pretty good and makes sense to everybody?
Matt, again, I'm not seeing any questions come in.
All right.
So carry on.
Very good. So let's just make a real quick purchase order for some subcontract and some other, and we'll talk about just some differences between the material and stuff going into inventory. You know, that's pretty straightforward and easy to understand, but let's add some other, I'm going to add a new PO, click the new PO button. And now I'm going to add my vendor. Again, I can click in that, I'm going to choose by name, and I'm just going to start typing the name of my company. So instead of a piece of material, we're going to add some subcontract services. So let's see if we've got some heat treat defined in our item masters. So I'm going to add a heat treat. And I'm going to say heat items. So we can see in the item master for our heat treat object, they've got the material set as other, but I want that to actually be recognized as a subcontract. And that's going to be for my job, 1027 again. So I'm going to just tell them there's 1 unit, and my cost is going to be a flat $80 for that service. So I've added my heat treat. I let the system know it's a subcontract, and it's going to be for my job building the door keys. So I'm going to issue this really quick. Again, we'll preview it. Looks good. Our status is going to change for our purchase order. Again, we'll add a line right into our material usage to let the system know that we've ordered this and we're waiting on it. So what happens when I receive this item, you're going to note we don't have the option, the two buttons down here. And that's because this is a subcontract. So we don't really have the choice to move this into inventory. We only have the one choice, which is we receive the goods, we're going to have the charges appear on the bill right away, and it's going to add to the material usage tab at that time as well. So if I had another certification, I could drop it on there, but I don't need that right now. So that's the important part. Sometimes you're going to see that receive and the receive and move button. Sometimes you'll just see the receive. And it's really based upon the bill type and the destination. Those kind of work in concert together to determine what's logical to ask you at this point in time. And just to get back to our traceability and the discussion where we had attached our certification, let's see if we can find that, because our customer's asking some questions about our super duper titanium. So if we go back over into our job, once again from our material usage tab, you'll note as soon as I click on the super duper titanium, our little cool toolbar down here now has my certification, so I can get that file, print it up, send it off to my customer, whatnot. If we get into a situation where you've received the purchase order but forgot to attach something, which I've had several of our customers already have happen, again, you can pop right into this material usage tab or the inventory and attach a new document right here. So I got an additional certification for my super duper titanium. Let me drag a file into there. Same deal. So you don't necessarily need to commit to it right away. You can do it after the fact as well, though we prompt you at both when you receive it if you wanted to attach the certification. So you can kind of do it either way, whatever works best for your business. Any questions on everything we've covered thus far?
Our audience is not asking a lot of questions today, which is fine. We appreciate the questions we receive. If you have any questions, are you pretty well wrapped up?
I think that was most of that I wanted to cover, so please, yeah.
If there's any other questions that you have on this topic or another topic in Realtrac, we've got a minute here that we can try and respond.
Great.
Okay. That being the case, please join. Thank you for being here today. And please join us for our next scheduled webinar on Thursday, June 12th, which is Managing Inventory in Realtrac. Matt showed you a couple things that connect purchase orders into inventory today. That webinar will be hosted by Don Colley. And on behalf of Matt, our Realtrac team, and Realtrac Performance ERP, we thank you for joining us in the webinar today, and we trust that along with Realtrac, your company will win the business race today. Have a great day. The session is now closed.